Story 1. The third leg under the table. In the old boarding house at the end of Alley 17, people still whispered about one very strange thing: if it was past midnight, you absolutely must not sit alone studying at the wooden desk placed next to the window. And if you heard something lightly rubbing beneath your feet, you must not bend down to look. But back then, Min did not believe it. Min was a final year university student who rented a room on the second floor of that boarding house because it was cheap. The room was small, the walls yellowed, the ceiling low, with only an iron bed, a plastic wardrobe, and an old wooden desk the landlord had left behind. The desk looked very ordinary. Its surface was scratched in many places. One corner was slightly rotten from dampness, but it was still sturdy. The landlord said that if he did not like it, he could throw it away. But Min thought it was still usable, so he kept it. From the very first night, Min felt that the room was not peaceful. Every time it was almost midnight, when the boarding house began to fall silent, when the sound of vehicles outside became sparse and the room next door turned off its lights, Min would hear a very small knock, knock coming from under the desk. At first, he thought it was a mouse. In an old boarding house, having mice was normal. But that sound was not like a mouse running. It was slow, steady, like someone using their fingernails to knock on the wood from underneath. One night, Min was sitting and working on his graduation project. The clock on his laptop showed 12:07. He had just typed a few lines when suddenly he felt something touch his ankle lightly. Very lightly. Cold. Like the fingertip of someone who had just dipped their hand in ice water. Min jolted, pulling his legs up onto the chair. He lowered his head, intending to look down, but at that exact moment the electricity in the room flickered once. The fluorescent light on the ceiling buzzed and then lit up again. He scolded himself for being cowardly, thinking it must have been the laptop charging cable or the edge of his pants brushing against him. But when he looked around, the charging cable was on the left, while the foot that had just been touched was on the right. From that day on, the strange things happened more often. Every night after midnight, there would be noises under the desk. Sometimes it was knocking, sometimes it was a very faint scratching sound, and sometimes it sounded like fabric rubbing against the tile floor. Min began to feel uneasy, but because he was working on his graduation project, he had to stay up almost every night. Once, a classmate named Kwan came to Min's room to work on a group assignment. The two of them sat side by side at the wooden desk, their laptops open and glowing, coffee placed on the table. At nearly midnight, Kwan suddenly stopped moving his hands. "Do you keep a cat?" Min frowned. "No." "Then what just touched my leg?" The air in the room immediately went still. Min looked at Kwan. Kwan looked back at him, his face turning pale. Under the desk, the sound, knock, knock, rang out twice. Kwan was about to bend down to look, but Min grabbed his hand. "Don't." Min himself did not understand why he said that. It was just that in that moment, he had a very clear feeling, if they bent down, they would see something they should not see. The two of them sat completely still. The knocking stopped, but a few seconds later, from under the desk came a very faint breath. It was not the sound of wind. It was not a mouse. It was the sound of a person. Kwan jumped up, knocking over the cup of coffee. Both of them ran out into the hallway, standing there panting under the yellow light. Min's room door remained open. Inside, the wooden desk stood silently in the darkness, as if nothing had ever happened. The next morning, Min asked the landlady about the desk. At first, she avoided the question, saying it was an old desk bought from a second-hand market and that she did not know its origin. But when Min told her there were sounds under the desk, her face immediately changed color. She remained silent for a long time before speaking softly. "Don't sit at that desk after 12 o'clock. Min asked why. The landlady looked down at the floor, her voice lower. "Before you, there was a girl who rented that room. She studied design and often stayed up late too. Every day she sat at that very desk. One day, people found her dead in the room. Her head was collapsed on the tabletop, her eyes wide open, staring down under the desk." Min felt goosebumps rise. "How did she die?" The doctor said sudden death. But when they carried the body away, both of her feet were bruised purple. as if someone had gripped them very tightly. Under the desk, there were fingernail scratch marks all over the inner surface of the wood. And the strangest thing was, the landlady hesitated. They found long hair tangled around the four legs of the desk. A lot of it, but that hair wasn't hers. That night, Min decided to drag the desk outside and throw it away, but he could not lift it by himself. The desk was not big, yet when Min pulled it, it was as heavy as if it were stuck firmly to the floor. He called Quan over to help. Only when the two of them carried it together did the desk move a little. When they pulled the desk away from its old position, Min discovered that beneath it, on the tile floor, there was a black stain shaped like a curled-up person. The stain was faint, like long-term dampness, but the more he looked, the more it resembled a person lying face down, both hands clinging to the four legs of the desk. Quan said nothing more. The two of them carried the desk down to the yard and stood it in the corner of the boarding house. That night, Min went to sleep early. But exactly at 12:13, he woke up because he heard knocking. Knock, knock? The sound came from right beside the bed. Min opened his eyes. The room was pitch dark, with only the street light shining through the window. He slowly turned his head toward the corner of the room. The wooden desk had returned. It stood in exactly its old position, next to the window. On the tabletop, Min's laptop was open, its screen glowing blue even though he clearly remembered turning it off. The mouse cursor moved on its own and opened a blank file. Then words appeared on the screen one by one. "Why won't you look down?" Min lay frozen. Cold sweat ran down his temple. Under the desk, the darkness thickened. In that darkness, something was moving. A pale white hand slowly reached out and grabbed the leg of the desk. Then a second hand. Long, black, broken fingernails. Min wanted to scream, but his throat was blocked tight. Those two hands clawed at the tile floor, pulling a twisted human body out from under the desk. Long hair covered its entire face. Its neck was bent to one side as if broken. It did not crawl all the way out. Only half of its upper body emerged, then stopped. Under the hair, one eye opened. It looked at Min. Its mouth slowly curled upward. "Look down." That voice was hoarse, as if coming from a throat full of water. Min sprang up and rushed to the door, but the room door would not open. He pounded on it, screaming and calling for help. No one answered. The knocking under the desk rang out more frantically, as if dozens of fingers were scratching the wood at the same time. Then Min felt something icy cold wrap around his ankle. He looked down by reflex. The biggest mistake of his life. Beneath Min's feet, there was not just one hand. There were many hands. They grew out from the darkness under the desk, long and pale, clinging to his legs, and deeper inside the gamban, where there should have been only a small empty space. There was instead a deep black hollow like the mouth of a well. Inside that darkness, a woman's face was tilted upward, staring at him. No eyes. Only two black sockets oozing blood. Min fainted. The next morning, Quan and the landlady broke the door open and found Min curled up under the desk. His two legs had been pulled deep inside, while the upper half of his body remained outside. His face was deathly white, his eyes wide open. He was still alive, but he could not speak for 3 days. When he woke up in the hospital, Min only repeated one sentence over and over. "Don't look down, it waits for you to look down." After that, Min moved out immediately. The landlady also took the desk away and burned it, but a neighbor said that when the fire rose, from inside the wood came a scream like a woman crying. The four legs of the desk curled inward, twisting like human legs being burned. They thought everything had ended. But 3 months later, Quan sent Min a photo. It was a photo of Quan's new rented room. In the photo, in the upper right corner of the room, there was an old wooden desk placed beside the window. Quan messaged, "I just bought an old desk from the second-hand market. Does it look familiar?" As soon as Min saw the photo, his hands trembled. Under the desk, in the dim darkness, there was a pale white woman's foot sticking out. And beside it was another foot. Then another one. As if there was not only one person sitting underneath, but many people waiting for midnight.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Story 2. The person sitting under the dining table. My grandmother's house in the countryside had a very large dining table. It was made of dark ironwood, so heavy that even 4 grown men struggled to carry it. It had been in the house since before my mother was born. The surface was covered with knife marks, round burn marks from hot pots, and a long crack running from the center toward the edge. When I was little, I loved crawling under that table to play. The space beneath it was wide, dark, and cool. I often brought a flashlight, comic books, and snacks down there, imagining it was my secret house. But my grandmother did not like it. Every time she saw me crawl under, she would pull me out immediately. If it's past midnight, looking under the table brings bad luck. I asked what kind of bad luck, but she only shook her head. There's someone under there. At that time, I thought she was just trying to scare children. It wasn't until I was 17 that I realized her words were not meant as a warning for fun. That year, my grandfather passed away. Our whole family returned to the countryside for the funeral. It lasted 3 days, with people constantly coming and going. During the day, the house was noisy with crying, chanting, and the clatter of dishes. But at night, when all the guests had left, the house became strangely cold and empty. After the funeral, my mother and my aunt slept in the front room. I slept alone in a small room next to the kitchen. That room connected directly to the dining room, where the ironwood table stood. On the first night after the burial, I stayed awake because I wasn't used to the place. Around midnight, I heard the sound of a chair being dragged. Creak. It came from the dining room. I lay still, thinking someone had gotten up to drink water. But then I heard the sound of a bowl being placed on the table. Clack. Then the faint tapping of chopsticks against a bowl. I sat up and called softly, "Mom?" No one answered. I opened the door slightly and looked out. The dining room was dim, lit only by moonlight coming through the window. The wooden table stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by 6 chairs. One chair at the head of the table was pulled slightly out, as if someone had just stood up. A chill ran down my spine. The next morning, I told my mother. She said it was probably a cat jumping on the table. But when my grandmother heard, her face darkened. She looked at me for a long time and then asked, "Did you look under the table?" I said no. She let out a breath. "Then you're still lucky." The second night, the whole family ate dinner late. The meal was set on the ironwood table. The seat at the head of the table, where my grandfather used to sit, was left empty. My grandmother did not allow anyone to sit there. On the table, there was still a full bowl of rice, a pair of chopsticks, and a cup of water for him. When everyone finished eating, my mother cleared the dishes. I stayed behind, texting on my phone. At that moment, I heard a very faint sound under the table. Scrrr, scrrr. Like fingernails scratching the underside of the wood. I instinctively lowered my head. My grandmother shouted from behind me, "Don't look." Her voice startled me, and I lifted my head immediately. She rushed over and pulled me away from the table, her hands trembling. "After midnight, no matter what you hear, you must not look under there. Do you understand?" I looked at the clock on the wall. 12:01. My whole body went cold. On the third night, it rained heavily. The rain hit the roof tiles, and the wind howled through the cracks like someone moaning. Everyone had gone to sleep. I lay in bed, unable to fall asleep. From the dining room came the sound of chairs being dragged again. Creak. This time, not just one. Creak, creak, creak. As if many people were pulling out chairs to sit around the table. Then came the sound of bowls and chopsticks. Clack, clack. I held my breath. The smell of food drifted into the room. But dinner had been cleared long ago. The smell was like freshly cooked rice and soup, mixed with the scent of burning incense. A hoarse voice echoed from the dining room. "Come eat." It was my grandfather's voice. I started crying immediately, not out of relief, but out of fear. He was dead. I had seen them close the coffin with my own eyes. Yet his voice was right outside, beside the table. "Come eat." The voice repeated, closer this time. I pulled the blanket over my head. But then, under my bed, I heard fingernails scratching against the tile floor. Clack, clack, clack. A whisper sounded right next to my ear. "Why aren't you coming?" I screamed. My mother and aunts rushed in and turned on the lights. There was no one, but on the floor beside my bed were muddy footprints stretching from the dining room to the edge of my bed. The next morning, my grandmother finally told the truth. Long ago, when she was young, that ironwood table did not belong to her family. It belonged to a wealthy family in the village. That family had 7 members, all of whom died in a single night in a fire. People said that night they were having dinner when the fire suddenly erupted from the kitchen. The front door got stuck, and no one could escape. When villagers broke in, the entire family had burned to death around the table. One child was not found burned on a chair, but under the table, clutching the legs tightly, its face tilted upward as if it had seen something before it died. After the fire, the house was abandoned. The ironwood table, strangely, did not burn completely, only turned black. Someone in the village sold it cheaply. My grandfather bought it, thinking the wood was still good. From the day the table came into the house, every night there were sounds of people eating at midnight. At first, my grandfather did not believe it, until one night, he bent down under the table to pick up a fallen chopstick. There was a child sitting there. It was charred black like coal, but its eyes were completely white. It looked up at my grandfather and smiled. From that day on, my grandfather became quiet. He forbade everyone from looking under the table after midnight. My grandmother said he once told her that under that table, it was not just the child. Those who died in the fire still came back to eat every night. They did not like being seen. Anyone who saw them would be invited to sit and eat with them. I felt chills all over. My mother wanted to throw the table away, but my grandmother refused. No, if you take it away, it will follow the one who carries it. Burning it won't destroy it completely. As long as no one looks under it after midnight, it's fine. I did not understand why she kept it. Maybe because it had been there too long. Maybe because my grandfather had told her so. Or maybe because the living are sometimes afraid to change things connected to the dead. On the last night before we returned to the city, I slept with my mother. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up thirsty. My mother was fast asleep. I didn't want to go out, but my throat was dry. I thought if I moved quickly through the dining room to the kitchen, it would be fine. I opened the door quietly. The dining room was completely dark. But around the ironwood table, 6 chairs had been pulled out. On the table were 7 bowls, each filled with white rice. Steam rose from them. At the head of the table, where my grandfather used to sit, there was the shadow of a thin man with his head lowered. I couldn't see his face, only his wrinkled hands resting on the table. They looked like my grandfather's hands. I froze. The figure slowly raised its head. My grandfather's voice echoed. "I told you not to come out." I stepped back, but behind me, the bedroom door slammed shut. At the same time, laughter of a child echoed from under the table. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew very clearly. But the more afraid a person is, the more their eyes are drawn toward what they fear. I looked down. Under the table, a child was sitting, hugging its knees. Its skin was burned black and cracked in patches. Its hair was sparse, stuck to its scalp, but its mouth stretched into a wide grin, so wide it tore to both sides of its cheeks. Around it were 6 pairs of legs. Not the legs of the living. Some were burned down to nothing. Some were only bones. Some were deformed, flesh fused together. All of them stood still under the table, their toes pointing toward me. The child raised a blackened finger to its lips. "Shush." Then it pointed to the empty chair beside the table. "Please sit and eat." I fainted. When I woke up, I was lying on the bed, my grandmother sitting beside me, crying. My mother said I had sleepwalked the night before, walked into the dining room, and fainted, but I knew that wasn't true. Because on my wrist, there was a small black handprint, like a child's hand covered in soot had gripped me. After that day, we returned to the city. I never wanted to go back to that house again. 3 years later, my grandmother passed away. The house was sold to a distant relative. Before selling it, my mother asked whether they should remove the table. No one dared to take it. In the end, they left it there. The new owners were a young couple with a small child. 1 month later, my mother received a call from the village. Their 4-year-old son had been found sitting under the table at midnight, holding a bowl of rice. eating while talking to someone. When his mother asked who he was talking to, he replied, "With the old man and the burned child. They said from now on, they will eat with me every night." After that, the house was abandoned again. Villagers said that on rainy nights, if you passed by, you could still see lights on inside. Through the window, you could see a family sitting around the table eating. But if you looked carefully under the table, you would see more pairs of legs. More than 7 pairs. As if anyone who had ever looked under there at midnight would eventually have to stay and eat with them forever.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Story 3. The Desk on the 13th Floor. I once worked as a night security guard for an office building in the city center. The building had 15 floors, but everyone there avoided mentioning the 13th floor. The elevator panel still had the number 13, but that floor was almost entirely vacant. The company that had rented it before had moved out after an accident, and since then no one had leased it for long. On my first day, the head guard, Mr. Lamb, gave me very specific instructions. Do your rounds on every floor, but for the 13th floor, just stand outside the elevator and shine your flashlight in. Don't go in deep. If you see lights turning on by themselves inside the offices, just report it, no need to check. And remember, never look under the table in the meeting room at the end of the hallway after midnight. I found it amusing. Ghost stories were common for night guards. Old workers liked to scare the new ones. I nodded it off. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. On floors that were still occupied. People sometimes worked late until 10 p.m. After 11, the entire building went silent. Only the hum of the central air system, the occasional self-check of the elevator, and the sound of my footsteps on the stone floor remained. Nothing strange happened for the first 3 nights. On the 4th night, around 12:20 a.m., the security monitor flickered. Among the 40 camera feeds, only the camera on the 13th floor kept glitching. I saw the hallway there completely dark, but at the far end, a sliver of light leaked through the door of the meeting room. I remembered Mr. Lamb's warning. But at that moment, my radio crackled. A very faint female voice came through. "Sir, please help me." I thought it might be an employee trapped somewhere. I responded, "Who is this? Which floor are you on?" The radio went silent for a few seconds. Then there was the sound of heavy breathing. "The 13th floor, I'm under the table." My scalp went numb. I tried calling Mr. Lamb, but couldn't reach him. The camera feed was still glitching. I hesitated for a few minutes, then decided to go check. Thinking back, if someone really needed help and I didn't go, I would be responsible. The elevator ride to the 13th floor was unusually slow. Normally it took only a few seconds, but that night it felt endless. The lights inside flickered. When the doors opened, a wave of cold air hit my face. The hallway on the 13th floor was darker than the others. The faint green exit light at the end made everything look as if it were submerged in water. I walked slowly, shining my flashlight. On both sides were empty offices. Glass doors covered in dust. Inside were leftover swivel chairs, filing cabinets, tangled cables on the floor. The meeting room at the end of the hallway was slightly open. Warm yellow light spilled out. I stood at the door and called out, "Is anyone inside?" No answer. But from the floor, I heard fingernails tapping against the table legs. Knock, knock, knock. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The meeting room was large. In the center was a long black table surrounded by 12 chairs. Only one ceiling light was on, the others off, leaving the corners of the room in darkness. The air conditioner was off, yet the room was freezing. On the table was an old desk phone. Even though the company had moved out long ago, its cord was cut, the loose end hanging to the floor. My radio crackled again. "Are you here?" The woman's voice echoed inside the room. I spun around. No one. "Where are you?" A soft laugh answered. "I told you, I'm under the table." I stepped back. Logic told me to check, but instinct screamed not to. I shined my flashlight toward the floor, trying not to bend down too much. Under the table was pitch black. Strangely, the beam of light could not penetrate it, as if the darkness there was denser than normal. Then, from beneath the table, a woman's hand slowly reached out. Pale, bluish, fingernails chipped with red polish. It pressed against the floor and slowly dragged across it. I froze. The voice spoke again. "Bend down and look at me." I turned and ran. But the meeting room door slammed shut. I rushed to pull it open. But the handle was ice cold and rigid, as if locked from outside. My radio crackled continuously. Mixed within the static were whispers of many voices. "Look. Look down. She's there. Look." I pounded on the door, shouting. No response. Behind me, the chairs in the room began to turn. One by one. All of them rotating to face the table. From under the table, the scratching grew louder. Something was crawling out. I saw long black hair dragging across the floor. Wet and tangled, a head slowly emerged from the darkness. Its face pressed against the floor. Its neck was broken, twisted at an unnatural angle. It crawled forward with its arms, while the lower half of its body remained deep inside the darkness. As if something was holding it there. The hair covered its face, but from within it, one eye opened, staring directly at me. I couldn't take it anymore. I shut my eyes tightly. Her voice came from right below me. "If you don't look, how will you save me?" That made me hesitate. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she was truly a spirit asking for help. Maybe she had been trapped, killed, and needed someone to see the truth. That foolish thought made me open my eyes. Instantly, I found myself standing right next to the table. I didn't know how I got there. My legs were pressed against its edge. Under the table, the woman lay on her back, her head twisted to one side, eyes rolled white, her mouth was wide open, filled with staples and shards of glass. But the most horrifying thing was not her. Behind her, deep in the darkness beneath the table, there were many other faces. Office workers. Men, women, young, old. They were packed together in that narrow space where no such number of people could possibly fit. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide open. They looked at me with expressions that were both pleading and hungry. Then all of them opened their mouths at once. "Take our place." I stumbled backward, hitting a chair. A hand grabbed my ankle and pulled hard. I fell to the floor, my chin striking painfully. From under the table, dozens of arms reached out, grabbing my shirt, my belt, my wrists. They were cold and slippery like bodies soaked in water. I struggled frantically. In panic, my hand hit a swivel chair. I grabbed it and threw it hard at the glass wall of the meeting room. The glass cracked but didn't break. I kicked it repeatedly until it finally shattered. I crawled through the broken frame, ignoring the shards cutting into my hands. As I ran into the hallway, a horrifying scream erupted behind me. The meeting room door remained closed, but from inside, countless hands slammed against the shattered glass. I ran toward the elevator. It wouldn't open. I had no choice but to run down the emergency stairs. From the 13th floor to the first, I heard footsteps behind me the entire way. Not fast, not slow, always a few steps behind. Creak, creak, like chairs dragging across the floor. I reached the security room around 1 a.m., locked the door, and sat trembling until morning. When Mr. Lamb arrived and saw my face, he didn't ask much. He only sighed. "You looked under it." I told him everything. He listened in silence, then told me about the accident years ago. The company that had rented the 13th floor was a financial firm. A female employee named Han had been bullied by her coworkers for a long time. One night, she stayed late to work. The next morning, they found her dead in the meeting room at the end of the hallway. Her body was under the table, her neck broken, her mouth filled with shards of glass. The security cameras that night had malfunctioned from midnight to 1 a.m. The police ruled it a suicide, but many did not believe it. Before she died, Han had sent a message to her best friend. "There's someone under the table telling me to look down." After her death, strange things began happening. Employees working late heard a woman crying under the table. Some who looked under it lost their minds, constantly muttering that it was crowded down there, that they needed more space. A few months later, the company moved out. The 13th floor had been abandoned ever since. I asked Mr. Lamb why they didn't permanently seal the floor. "It's been locked, but the elevator still opens by itself. Anyone who hears the call and goes up, it means it has chosen them." I quit my job that very day. But it didn't end. A week later, I began hearing my radio crackling in my rented room, even though I had already returned it. At first, it was just faint static at midnight. Then came the woman's voice. "Sir." I moved rooms. The sound followed. I moved back to my parents' house. On the first night, at exactly 12:20, from under my work desk came knocking. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't dare look. I pulled the blanket over my head, but the knocking continued all night. The next morning, under the table surface, there was a new scratch mark. Next to it was a reversed inscription. "You have already seen me." From that day on, I never sat at a desk after midnight. I also never let my feet stay under a table if the room was too quiet. One time, a friend came over late at night. He sat at my desk playing games, laughing and talking. I warned him not to stay past midnight, but he didn't believe me. At 12:20, he suddenly went silent. I asked, "What's wrong?" He stared at the screen, his face pale. Something just touched my leg. I immediately told him to stand up, but he bent down instead. Just for 1 second. Then he screamed. That scream, I will never forget it. He fell backward, crawling into the corner, stammering, "There's a woman, her neck is broken, she's smiling." I looked toward the space under the desk. I did not bend down. But in the darkness near the floor, I saw a pale hand slowly reach out. Fingernails chipped with red polish. It tapped lightly on the table leg 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. Then a soft whisper. "Next time, it's your turn to look."
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.